The dog didn't let anyone get close to the car. When the police finally saw what was inside, they were overwhelmed with emotion. It was a freezing night, one where the wind howled fiercely, cutting through anyone brave enough to step outside. The streets were empty, the windows of houses tightly shut, with only a few lights flickering in the distance, showing that people preferred the warmth of their homes. But on this particular street, something caught the attention of the few neighbors who were still awake. A sound that initially seemed distant grew louder and more insistent. It was a dog, barking, non-stop. The car, which had been abandoned for days, sat motionless, like an object forgotten by time. Nobody knew who it belonged to or why it was there. What truly intrigued the neighbors, however, was the behavior of the dog. Not only was it barking incessantly, but it paced back and forth around the car with a determination that seemed unusual. Its body was tense, as if ready to protect something or someone. "How strange," said Donya, Marta, who lived directly across from the car. She peeked through her curtains, trying to get a better look at what was happening. "That dog hasn't stopped barking. There must be something wrong." Some neighbors began appearing at their windows, curious but hesitant. No one dared to step out into the cold night, yet the dog's behavior was impossible to ignore. He seemed nervous but also resolute. The dog refused to let anyone approach the car. With matted fur and weary eyes, he barked firmly, as if saying, "Stay away, there's something important here." It was as if he had been placed there with a mission, something the neighbors couldn't quite grasp. Some speculated that the dog was simply lost, while others thought he might be hungry. But something about the scene made the neighbors' hearts race. The feeling that something significant was about to be uncovered lingered in the air. Donya, Marta, ever the curious one, called her neighbor. "Maria, have you seen that? That car has been there for days, and now that dog won't leave. Something's not right. We should call someone." Over time, more neighbors began whispering among themselves. Should they approach? What if the dog was aggressive? Doubt hung heavy in the air. Some thought it best to leave the dog alone, but others, like Doña Marta, believed they needed to investigate further. As the minutes passed, the tension only grew. The dog showed no signs of leaving. In fact, he seemed increasingly agitated, as if desperately trying to draw attention to what was inside the car. It was then that one of the neighbors voiced what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say. "I think it's better to call the police." Don Juan, always practical, suggested, "That dog isn't there by chance." And so, as the night grew colder, everyone waited anxiously. The police were on their way. What would they find? When the police arrived, the atmosphere became even tenser. The red and blue lights flashed in the darkness, illuminating the cold, quiet street. The neighbors, now fully curious, peered out from behind their curtains. The car, once ignored, had become the center of attention. The dog, who had seemed nervous before, now exuded strength and purpose. As soon as the police approached the car, the dog began barking even louder. His eyes were fixed, his posture firm, and he moved back and forth, creating an invisible barrier between the car and anyone who tried to get closer. His fur was matted, but his eyes shone with almost human determination. The officers, accustomed to handling all kinds of situations, realized it wouldn't be easy to approach the dog. They tried to calm him down, speaking softly and attempting to gain his trust, but the dog didn't move. He neither growled nor attacked. He simply stood his ground, as if on a mission to protect the car at all costs. One of the officers realized that the dog wasn't violent, just protective. He decided to try something different. Taking a piece of food, he approached slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The dog eyed him suspiciously, but seemed torn between the food and the car, as if saying, "You Don't think I'm leaving, but maybe I'll trust you for a moment. Finally, with patience, the officer managed to get closer to the car. The dog, now slightly calmer, took a few steps back, but kept his gaze fixed, never losing sight of what was inside. It was as if he knew that whatever was inside was precious and needed protection at all costs. Observers could see that the dog wasn't acting on instinct alone. The more they watched, the clearer it became that he was playing a much larger role. It was as if he understood the gravity of the situation better than anyone else. What really mattered at that moment? The police were ready to open the car door. All the neighbors held their breath, waiting to see what would be revealed. The dog, his heart racing and his gaze unwavering, braced himself for whatever came next. What no one knew was that he wasn't there by chance. In fact, he was guarding a secret that would soon come to light. Before we continue, remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their incredible stories. When the police finally opened the car door, a deep silence fell over the street. It was as if even the wind had stopped blowing to witness what was about to happen. The neighbors, watching from their windows, held their breath, while the dog, now a little farther away, remained alert, his eyes fixed on the door. Inside the car, the police found something no one expected. A child, a baby, small and fragile, lay on the back seat, wrapped in an old, dirty blanket. The scene was heartbreaking. The baby's skin was pale, his eyes closed, and he seemed so weak that he barely breathed. The police immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. One officer, with a firm voice, requested an ambulance. Another checked the child's vital signs. The baby was alive, but extremely weak. It was hard to imagine how long he had been there, abandoned and alone, in the cold, dark car. It was then that everyone understood why the dog had acted the way he did. He wasn't simply protecting. The car hay was safeguarding the life inside it. The dog, who had seemed aggressive and threatening, was actually desperate to draw attention to the child in need of rescue. Doña Marta, who had been watching everything from her window, began to cry. She whispered to herself, "This dog is an angel." In a way, it was true. Without him, who knows what might have happened to the baby. The dog, with his relentless barking, had been the only one to realize something was wrong and refused to leave until help arrived. As the ambulance arrived, police worked quickly to warm the baby and stabilize him. The street, once silent, was now filled with sirens and flashing lights. The neighbors, who had been watching from afar, felt a mix of relief and sadness. A baby so small, left alone in the world, but fortunately, he had an unexpected guardian by his side. The dog, who had remained steadfast throughout, was the hero of the night. The police, still stunned by the discovery, wondered who could have done such a thing. Who would abandon a baby like that? The scene was tragic, but the dog's desperation to protect the child showed everyone that even in the darkest moments, there was still hope. One officer, approaching the car and seeing the abandoned baby, felt a knot in his chest that he'd never experienced before. His heart began to race, and his hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. He crouched down, looking at the tiny, fragile body wrapped in that warm blanket. For a moment, he couldn't hold back his tears. He had become a father just weeks earlier. In his mind, the image of his own baby, safe and comfortable in his mother's arms, wrapped in a soft, fragrant blanket, flooded his thoughts. Every night, when he returned home from work, he rushed to see his baby sleeping peacefully in the crib without a care in the world. But here, in front of this cold, dark car, he saw a baby who had none of that. A baby fighting for his life, abandoned, alone, as if discarded. Tears streamed silently down his face. He tried to hide them, but he couldn't. The contrast between the comfort his son received and the brutality of the scene before him was overwhelming. The officer crouched lower, feeling the weight of responsibility to save this life. How could someone do this? He thought, consumed by a deep sadness. He wanted to take the baby in his arms, warm him, take him home, and protect him, just as he did every night with his own son. Life, at that moment, felt so unfair. One baby at home, surrounded by love and care, and another, abandoned to his fate, at the mercy of a cruel destiny. The officer looked up at the sky, searching for answers, but all he found was the harsh reality. He knew he had to be strong, yet, at that moment, it was impossible not to feel his heart break into pieces. With tears in his eyes, he promised himself that he would do everything possible to ensure the baby survived. After all, every child deserved the same love and care that his own son received at home. At that moment, he realized his mission was more than duty, it was a matter of humanity. As the ambulance arrived to care for the baby, the dog stayed nearby, as if knowing his mission wasn't over. The police no longer saw him as a threat. Instead, they began to understand that he was the true hero of the night. The dog, who had seemed fierce, was actually a loyal protector, dedicating himself to the child with unmatched devotion and courage. The dog, whose origins remained unknown, displayed remarkable loyalty. He didn't allow anyone near the baby without being present, watching every movement closely. What impressed the police and neighbors most was the dog's demeanor. He wasn't aggressive, but clearly alert, as if aware that this defenseless baby needed him. It seemed he felt responsible for guarding this life. Even as paramedics arrived, the dog kept his eyes fixed on the baby, attentive to every action. When they finally placed the boy on a stretcher to take him to the hospital, the dog followed closely, without hesitation. With each step, he watched as if supervising to ensure everything was done correctly. A true guardian. Doña Marta, looking from her window, couldn't contain her words. "This dog is an angel. I've never seen anything like this in my life." One of the officers commented, "You're not going to separate from this baby, whatever happens." Indeed, the dog remained resolute. Even when they placed the baby inside the ambulance, he tried to climb in too, barking softly as if to say, "I'm not done yet. I need to stay close." The paramedics, moved by the dog's dedication, decided to let him in. And there he was, sitting quietly beside the stretcher, as if keeping watch, ensuring the baby he had protected for so long was safe. To those who witnessed it, the dog was more than a protector. He was a symbol of courage, loyalty, and unconditional love. With the baby en route to the hospital and the dog, now nicknamed Hero, by his side, the police began investigating what else had been left in the car. Besides the child, 2 items caught their attention. The first was a teddy bear, old and worn, its fur faded with time, but clearly cherished. Second item, even more intriguing, was an old, slightly crumpled photograph of an unfamiliar woman. The police handled the photo carefully. The woman in the image appeared young, with dark hair and a serene smile that seemed to hide something deeper. Who was she? Could she be the baby's mother? The teddy bear, clearly well loved, suggested that the boy had someone who cared for him, someone who wanted to leave him something familiar despite the sad and mysterious circumstances. As they examined the photo, more questions arose. Was the woman merely a stranger, or did she have a story connecting all the pieces of this puzzle? The abandoned baby, the protective dog, and now this image all seemed part of a larger mystery that the police needed to solve. Doña Marta, always observant, remarked to the other neighbors still gathered nearby, "Is this woman in the photo the mother? If she is, why did she leave the baby like that?" The police were determined to find out. They knew the photo could hold the key to understanding what happened. The mystery surrounding the woman in the photo began to spread, not only among the police, but also within the community. People started speculating, each forming their own theories about who she might be and why she abandoned the child. Some believed the mother was in trouble, unable to care for the baby. Others thought she might have been forced to leave the child with no other options. Still, others wondered if the woman could be missing or in danger. What everyone knew, however, was that the Doga faithful guardian was somehow connected to the story. Perhaps he knew the woman in the photo. Maybe he was the only witness to what had truly happened on that cold night. As the investigation continued, the woman's photo and the teddy bear were the only clues left behind, two items that could reveal much, but also raised even more questions. The mystery was only beginning to unfold. The woman's identity and the baby's abandonment quickly spread through the neighborhood. People who had previously only observed from afar were now deeply invested in the story, eager to understand how everything had transpired. The police were actively investigating, but as often happens in small communities, gossip, theories began to circulate. In every corner of the neighborhood, someone was talking about the case. Some believed the woman in the photo was a desperate mother, unable to care for her son for reasons unknown. Others suspected something darker lay beneath the surface, perhaps. The woman had been coerced into leaving the child, or even that something terrible had happened to her. Doña Marta, always talkative, met with her friends every afternoon, sharing everything she everything she believed she knew. "I'm sure the woman in the photo is the mother," she declared with conviction. "And that dog, he knew everything. I bet he even tried to protect her." The other neighbors listened intently, each forming their own assumptions. Some even began helping search for more clues. They wanted to know who the woman was and what had led her to abandon the baby. And the dog, of course, remained one of the biggest mysteries. How was he involved? Where had he come from? The police focused on gathering information that might connect the woman in the photo to the abandoned baby. They interviewed neighbors, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual in the preceding days. But no one had clear answers. It was as if the woman had appeared out of nowhere, left the baby, and vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the dog, now affectionately called Amora, was becoming a local celebrity. His loyalty and bravery in protecting the baby had endeared him to the community. Amora stayed close to the police, as if assisting in the investigation in his own way, following their every move with watchful eyes. He seemed to be waiting, as if he knew the mystery hadn't yet been fully resolved. The neighborhood children, curious about the entire story, asked their parents, "What happened to the baby? Who is the woman in the photo? Why did the dog protect him like that?" The answers remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. The entire community was mobilized, and no one would rest until the truth came to light. While the community speculated and the police continued their search for answers, the mystery took an unexpected turn. Amora, who had always been vigilant, began acting differently. He started pacing in circles, restless, until suddenly he began walking toward a distant street, head low but steps firm. The police, intrigued by Amora's behavior, decided to follow him. It wasn't common for a dog to lead someone somewhere, but in this situation, it seemed Amora knew something no one else did. It was as if he were guiding the police to the next piece of the puzzle. Neighbors nearby began murmuring, watching from a distance. Doña Marta, ever curious, whispered to those around her, "I think he's taking us somewhere. That dog is smarter than he looks." Amora walked with determination, crossing streets and passing through barren lots until he reached an old, abandoned building that had gone unnoticed for years. Its bare walls and broken windows gave the impression of a deserted place. But Amora stopped right at the entrance, looking at the police as if to say, "It's here." The officers exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. One of them took the first step, cautiously entering the building, while the others followed. The atmosphere inside was dark and dusty. But soon they realized something was there. In the distance, they heard a faint sound like a cough. Amora wagged his tail but remained focused. Following the sound, the police discovered a woman lying in a corner, visibly weakened. She could barely speak, her body frail, as if she hadn't eaten or drunk in days. It was then that one officer recognized her, the woman in the photo found in the car. The woman looked at them with tired eyes but with a sense of relief. She knew her time was running out, but Amora, the loyal dog, had done what she couldn't find help. As the police approached to assist her, Amora lay down beside her, as if finally completing his mission as a guardian. The woman was identified as Fernanda. Her story was still unclear, but what everyone knew at that moment was that the dog had led the police directly to her. Not only had he protected the baby, but he also knew there was more to uncover. Thanks to Amora, another piece of the mystery was revealed. The mystery surrounding the baby's abandonment began to unravel, but many questions remained. Who was Fernanda, and why had she left the baby? Fernanda, now weak, vulnerable, was taken immediately to the hospital for the care she desperately needed. She was visibly exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and her health condition was alarming. Doctors began treating her, while the police waited to learn what had happened. Amora, the loyal dog, stayed by her side the entire time, refusing to leave, as if he knew his presence was essential for her peace of mind. When Fernanda was finally able to speak, her voice was weak, almost a whisper, but her words were enough to move even the most seasoned officers. With tear-filled eyes, she confessed, "I abandoned my baby not because I wanted to, but because I was desperate." Her words were heavy with sadness and regret. Fernanda explained that she was seriously ill, penniless, without family, and unable to care for her son. Each day, her health worsened, and she feared she wouldn't survive much longer. Leaving the baby in the abandoned car had been her last attempt to save him, hoping someone would find him and give him a better life. She began crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she recalled the agonizing moment she made the decision to leave him. She hadn't wanted to do it, but she saw no other way out. She was alone and had no strength to continue. "I knew I was dying," she said, "and I didn't want my son to die with me." The weight of Fernanda's words settled heavily on the police and everyone who heard her story. They realized they weren't dealing with a simple case of abandonment, but with a woman driven to the brink of despair. Fernanda, amidst pain and illness, believed that leaving the baby was her only chance to give him a chance. At life a chance, she felt she could no longer offer. The presence of Amora, the loyal dog, began to make sense. Amora had stayed by the baby's side, protecting him, because Fernanda, in her heart, knew she couldn't be there to care for her son. Amora was more than just a doggy, was the bond of love and protection Fernanda wanted to leave behind, even in her absence. She stayed with him. Fernanda confessed, "Amora was always so protective, even when I couldn't walk anymore. When I had to leave him in the car, she stayed, watching over him, taking care of him." Tears continued to fall as Fernanda recounted her story, and the police now understood the depth of the pain she carried. Fernanda wasn't simply a woman who had abandoned her son. She was a mother, facing the worst possible scenario, doing what she believed was her only option to save her baby's life. Now, with Amora's help and the police's intervention, there was hope that both Fernanda and her baby could have a new beginning. After her confession, Fernanda was taken to receive proper treatment at the hospital, and the baby, now safe and under medical care, began to recover. The story, which had begun as a dark mystery, was slowly becoming clear, revealing the human and tragic side behind the abandonment. Fernanda, who had faced such a desperate situation, now received the help she never thought she'd have. Amora, the faithful dog, never left Fernanda's side. Even when she was unconscious and weak, Amora stayed by her side, as if understanding that his mission wasn't over. The hospital allowed Amora to remain in the room with Fernanda, and the doctors and nurses saw it as something extraordinary. It was as if the dog knew Fernanda needed him as much as the baby did. Days passed, and the story of Fernanda and Amora began spreading throughout the community. The people who had once speculated distrustfully now viewed Fernanda with new eyes, not as a criminal, but as a mother who, in her despair, believed she was doing her best to save her son. Constant presence of love and loyalty touched everyone's hearts. No one could deny the strength of the bond between them. When Fernanda began to recover, both physically and emotionally, something wonderful happened. A kind woman from the community named Doña Lourdes, who had followed the entire story closely, approached Fernanda with a proposal that would change their lives. Doña Lourdes was known for caring for abandoned animals and helping those in need. Seeing the love between Fernanda, Amora, and the baby, she knew she wanted to be part of their story of resilience. Fernanda, Doña Lourdes said with a gentle smile, "I know you've been through so much, but I see the love you have for your son, and I see how special Amora is. I'd like you to come live with me. Let me help you. Give you and your baby the support you need. We can be a family." Fernanda, still fragile, couldn't hold back her tears. Doña Lourdes' offer was a chance to start over, something she never thought she'd have. She looked at Amora, who wagged his tail happily beside Doña Lourdes, as if he too knew this offer was the answer they all needed. From that day on, Fernanda, her baby, and Amora went to live with Doña Lourdes. The elderly woman's small house, always full of warmth and kindness, became the new home for this unlikely but deeply connected family. Amora, the faithful guardian, finally found peace, knowing that everyone he had protected was together, safe, and loved. Now, with a new opportunity, Fernanda dedicated every moment to caring for the son she once feared she couldn't protect. She knew the road ahead would be long, but with Doña Lourdes' help and Amora's unbreakable loyalty, she felt she had finally found a real home. The baby, who had once been abandoned, was now surrounded by love, care, and above all, a new family. A family united by the transformative power of love and loyalty. And so, the story that began on a cold, mysterious night ended with a new beginning, full of hope and affection. A story that showed that, even in the darkest moments, the love and loyalty of a dog like Amora can transform lives, create unbreakable bonds. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.